Chapter 356, Extreme Blade 3. The blade user opened his mouth with a highly elated expression. Kyeonma. At his voice, unable to contain his excitement, Mok Jae-eun parted his lips with an interested look. I was going to kill him, but you blocked it? In the instant he was about to kill Ji, Mok Jae-eun had aimed to pierce the guy's neck by targeting the opening revealed in that moment. But he stopped the force he was swinging in an instant, and then reversed it to block the sword strike with the blade. Mok Jae-eun's gaze naturally went to his wrist and waist. The incredibly developed muscles were noticeable enough to be seen through the contours of his clothes. The grain is different. The most developed muscles in Mok Jae-eun's memory were those of Yu Mujin. If Yu Mujin's muscles were developed in the most ideal form, this person's muscles were quite different from normal people in their developed form. Meanwhile, Joey, whose life was saved thanks to Mok Jae-eun, said, "Who are you? That's not important, just step back." Although he felt slightly displeased as if he was being ignored, he soon suppressed this emotion out of gratitude for having his life spared and said, "I don't know who you are, but that person is not someone you can face alone. So don't be prideful and let's attack together." Pong. At that moment, Hui was thrown backward by the repelling force pushing him away. "What are you doing?" Tiang. At that moment, the blade user's treasured blade and Mok Jae-eun's precious sword Evil Commandment sword clashed. Then with the sound of air being torn, tremendous wind pressure arose around the two of them, and the ground of the cliff split. Seeing this, Joey unconsciously swallowed dry saliva. Kokik. If he had been even a little late, he would have been caught up in that aftermath. Who is this person again? He had thought that the only counterpart who could face that monstrous blade user was Oh Kyeonmu, one of the six heavens and the master of spiritual sword sanctuary. But looking at the single sword and blade strike that just clashed, it was almost evenly matched. This meant that this unidentified young man was also a monster corresponding to him. Where on earth did these monsters suddenly spring from? It was utterly baffling. Similarly, the surviving swordsmen nearby and Zhang Myong Sate, the elder of the Hangshan sect, couldn't hide their surprise at the appearance of this new peerless expert. Just looking at his face, he didn't even seem to be of age, yet he didn't yield at all when clashing with that blade user. Paruru. The blade user's blade and Mok Jae-eun's Evil Commandment sword trembled strongly as they clashed. In that state, the blade user opened his mouth. "Kyeonma. It's an honor to meet you like this. What an interesting day. To meet another person calling me by that name." "Another? How do you know me?" At Mok Jae-eun's question, the blade user smiled and said, "Who wouldn't know you, the origin and legend?" "Origin?" One of Mok Jae-eun's eyebrows raised. What is he talking about now? Go. As Mok Jae-eun was wondering, the blade user raised his energy and said, "Your first appearance in the martial world was boldly at Shaolin, the holy land of Buddhism, which could be called the antithesis of demons and the birthplace of Central Plains martial arts. The second was the Sichuan family, and the third is this place called the Holy Land of Swords, Spiritual Sword Sanctuary. It was worth the wait." "Yes." Kuririk. As the blade user's energy continued to rise, blue sparks flew from Mok Jae-eun's precious sword Evil Commandment sword that was clashing with it, and it started to be pushed back. Moreover, it wasn't just the sword that was being pushed back. Tweryu. Even the 2 feet supporting the ground were being pushed back. Mok Jae-eun's eyes glinted with interest. Although he hadn't yet opened the power of the 3 eyes from the point of opening the ghost eye, he couldn't feel any limit to this person's energy. It was difficult to measure his true chi, feeling like a huge mass of energy. Thinking he was ahead in inner force, the corner of the blade user's mouth rose. "My inner force has surpassed human limits." "I see. It's a shame. I aimed for now to make sure, but if I had known it would be like this, I should have aimed for when you had just taken your first steps. You keep saying things that are hard to understand." "Uhu. Let it pass over you. It's not something you can understand anyway." Tweryu. As the blade user's energy rose further, Mok Jae-eun's form continued to be pushed back. Confident in his superiority in inner force, the blade user intended to overwhelm Mok Jae-eun with his overwhelming inner force. But then, Kwaduk. At some point, Mok Jae-eun's feet stopped as if planted in the ground and didn't move. At this, the blade user's eyes narrowed. He was clearly far superior in inner force, so what was this suddenly rising capacity? It was at that very moment. Gugu. Humchit. Ferocious black energy flowed like a mirage from Mok Jaeungun's entire body, and the blade of the precious sword evil commandment sword that was clashing turned black. Rather than the energy itself growing, it felt like the capacity had explosively increased and concentrated. After being pushed back until just now, they were evenly matched again, but far from being bewildered, the blade user burst into laughter. Ah, yes. This much is needed to be called a legend. You're noisy. Pat. At that moment, Mok Jaeungun's left hand aimed for the blade user's eyes. The blade user tilted his head to the side and released the force he was applying to the blade. As this happened, Mok Jaeungun's form leaned in the direction he was swinging his sword. Then, Pat. The blade user let go of the blade he was holding and unleashed an extremely swift blade strike with his hand blade, as if to cut off Mok Jaeungun's wrist. Taeyong. However, the blade strike failed to cut Mok Jaeungun's right arm. This was because the precious sword plundering killing sword at his waist had naturally come out and blocked the blade user's hand blade. To block the extreme swift killing blade like this, truly living up to the reputation. Then how about this? At that moment the blade user also unleashed a blade technique with his left hand. Like just before, it was the extreme swift killing blade, an extremely swift technique. The blade technique unleashed with his left hand tried to split Mok Jaeungun's head in half in one breath. However, Pat. At that moment Mok Jaeungun narrowly avoided it and created distance behind him. As it was a blade strike coming down from above, there was no way other than avoiding or blocking it, but by creating even a little distance like this, Chichicheki, he could counter the blade technique. Mok Jaeungun's evil commandment sword and the blade user's hand blade imbued with sharp energy filled the space between them, and their speed was so fast that even Jiuyi and other experts who had surpassed the wall could hardly discern it with the naked eye. Naturally, it was impossible for ordinary swordsman or Zhang Mayong Sate to see. Too fast. Monsters. The sword and blade unleashed by these two peerless experts were truly the essence of swiftness. What was even more surprising was that the distance between them was only about 3 steps. It was a distance where a fatal strike could fly if there was even a small mistake, but there was no disturbance in their offense and defense. Watching their confrontation, an exclamation flowed from Jiuyi's mouth. Echi. At this, Zhang Mayong Sate asked in surprise. Amit Ba. Senior, can you see that? Do you think I can see it properly? At best, I can only see parts of it. Then why are you exclaiming like that? Their offense and defense are at too high a level. While the trajectory of the blade user's extremely swift blade techniques flew in with strange trajectories that normally couldn't be wielded, pressuring the opponent with ever-changing moves, that young swordsman was also unleashing extremely swift sword techniques. But surprisingly, he was using different techniques with both hands. Because he was using different techniques with both hands, it was no different from two people launching a joint attack so he could counter the strange trajectories of the incoming blades. To witness such an incredible battle before my eyes, he couldn't help but admire it. Chichicheki. It was after they had clashed for about 20 moves like that. It seemed like the situation would continue indefinitely, but the blade user was the first to leap backward and create distance. It wasn't because he couldn't withstand the offense and defense. If he had been a little late, the precious sword Juxul, dyed with black strong energy, would have pierced him. Watching the flying precious sword Juxul, the blade user inwardly clicked his tongue. He hadn't expected that while unleashing completely different techniques with both hands, he would even use the technique of Chi sword strong energy in the midst of that. Literally, he was doing the work of 3 people alone. To think he's already at this level. He had competed with numerous peerless experts to gain experience. Therefore, he was confident that he was superior not only in inner force but also in experience and insight. But that expectation was off. I thought he would be a novice since this was just the period when he was making a name for himself. He's not a novice at all. The corner of the blade user's mouth twisted subtly. To have reached such a realm when he's not even of age. As expected, this clan's talent was dangerously incomparable, enough to be envious. Indeed, it's right to uproot them from the beginning. The blade user lightly deflected the incoming black chi sword's strong energy with his left hand blade and then stretched out his right hand. His treasured blade that had fallen to the ground was sucked into his hand. Gripping the blade user then raised his energy even further. The warm-up is over, now let's do this properly. Gugu. The energy flowing from him was so strong that the faces of the swordsmen watching the battle turned pale. As the energy became stronger and sharper, Mok Jaeungun's gaze also became serious. Seems that until now was just a probing battle. Seeing that the guy was going to get serious, it seemed he too should raise his energy to his highest level without holding back. So, Gugu. He raised his demonic energy to 10-star level inner force. Then, as a chilling and ferocious energy spread in all directions, the swordsmen who were already overwhelmed by the overwhelming inner force trembled and stepped back. For them, these two peerless experts were already monsters beyond the realm of humans. It seemed dangerous to stay any closer. But then, Suk, Mok Jaeungun and the blade user who were raising their energy to fight with full power, simultaneously looked somewhere. It was none other than Hung. What is this? The orb, no, the sacred orb shining brightly in the hand of O Wung Song, the second son of Master O of Spiritual Sword Sanctuary. Young Master O Wung Huang, who was silently holding out his hand for him to hand over the sacred orb, and O Yinwo and Yi Songa, the granddaughter of the Holy Fire Priestess, who were right beside him, were equally surprised by this phenomenon. Hung. The light coming from the sacred orb surpassed the level of a night pearl. It was enough to brightly illuminate the entire surrounding area and more. What was even more surprising was the tremendous energy flowing out of the sacred orb. Could it be the true source? At the tremendous energy flowing out of the sacred orb, the blade user thought it might be the true source. No, with this level of energy it must be the true source. At this, the blade user reached out his hand towards O Wung Song and made a pulling gesture. Then, the sacred orb in O Wung Song's hand tried to fly towards the blade user, drawn by his majestic energy. Flustered, O Wung Song grasped it with both hands and tried not to let it be taken. However, there was no way O Wung Song's inner force could match the blade user's. As he had already raised his inner force to near its peak, O Wung Song too floated up and flew along with the sacred orb. Surprised, O Wung Huang hurriedly shouted, "Let go of that." But O Wung Song didn't let go of the sacred orb he was grasping. Captivated by the strange demonic nature of the sacred orb, he couldn't hear the voice of his eldest brother O Wung Huang. His only thought was not to let this be taken away. But then, Kung. His body, which was flying, suddenly fell to the ground midway. You interfere with true chi? The blade user furrowed his brow as he looked at Mok Jaeungun. He didn't expect him to interfere with the energy sent for void object grasping and disperse it. Could it be that his understanding of chi is superior to his own? Or has he learned some special technique? Pat. The blade user immediately launched his body. Whatever it was, it didn't matter. If that was the true source, he had to get his hands on it no matter what. Puruk. The blade user who reached O Wung Song's front in an instant, then tried to cut off his arm holding the sacred orb. However, Mok Jaeungun blocked his blade at the perfect moment. After blocking like that, Mok Jaeungun used true chi to perform the void object grasping technique to push him away and try to send him flying. However, Paryururu. O Wung Song's body only trembled but remained stopped in place without moving. This was because the blade user had likewise used true chi to bind him so he couldn't escape. The blade user used a change in technique to try to cut O Wung Song's arm once again. Of course, Mok Jaeungun wasn't one to just watch this, so he likewise used a change in technique to block the blade user's blade. Chichichekichin. As this was repeated 5 times in an instant, O Wung Song's face and body became filled with wounds. Although Mok Jaeungun had blocked exquisitely, he had directly received the aftermath of the sword and blade aura from the two peerless experts, so it would be strange if he were unscathed. Jururuk. Although he should be suffering from being covered in sword and blade wounds, O Wung Song still grasped the sacred orb and didn't even think of letting it go. At this, the blade user raised the corner of his mouth coldly. Then, twack. As if about to cut O Wung Song's arm, he swung his blade, but then, Puke. He thrust his blade into the ground. At that moment, 8 streams of blade energy arose from the blade and split the ground. That is. He recognized it. This was one of the blade user's ultimate techniques, the 8 Immortals Blade Competition. It was a technique with explosive capacity, but its power was incomparable to earlier. The blade energy spurting from the ground was so strong that it shook the earth as if an earthquake had occurred. Kururu. At that moment someone shouted. Everyone retreat. The cliff is about to collapse. Unable to withstand the blade energy of the strong chi, the cliff floor was not just splitting but about to collapse. As the earth shook and tilted towards the precipice, Mok Jiangun quickly grabbed Oh Woong-song's nape and leaped upwards. Pat. Having soared to a height of almost 4 zhang, he was about to throw Oh Woong-song. At that moment, "I've been waiting for this." The blade user, who had somehow leaped to a higher position than him, stretched out his left hand towards Mok Jiangun. Then, pachichichichichik. Blue streaks of lightning spread like roots, covering the void. The range was so wide that there was no room to avoid it. Chichikichikichik. Struck directly by the spreading lightning, the bodies of Mok Jiangun and Oh Woong-song flashed with blue lightning. Watching them being electrocuted, the blade user moved his body. Having stepped on the void, he didn't miss this opportunity and tried to behead Mok Jiangun in one breath. Pat. When struck by lightning, not only the muscles of the entire body but even the inner force becomes rigid. Qianma, this must be your first experience of... It was at that moment. Hey. He had naturally thought that he wouldn't be able to move after being struck by lightning energy. But despite Mok Jiangun's body still sparking with lightning flames, he moved his body as if nothing was wrong and blocked his blade strike. How? It was utterly incomprehensible. This wasn't energy that could be obtained through simple inner force techniques. With the power obtained through the true source of the dragon turtle, even any inner force expert would have their inner force itself become rigid and lose strength momentarily when struck by lightning energy. But how could he move? Just as he was wondering about this, Pat. Mok Jiangun, who had blocked his blade, immediately twisted his body in midair and, using the marvelous technique of void step, kicked upwards and launched his body downwards. This was because Oh Woong-song was falling towards the precipice. Thanks to his experience with Dam Baekwa, the blood saint of the Nine Blood sect, he had somehow endured the lightning energy in an instant to block the blade strike. But as part of his muscles became rigid, he had unintentionally let go of Oh Woong-song. Sure. It didn't matter if Oh Woong-song fell to his death on the precipice, but he had to retrieve the sacred orb. Chapter 357, Extreme Blade 4. The most important part in crafting any sword is the finishing touch. That is the act of infusing the sword heart. Whether the sword becomes a famous sword or a treasure sword, or remains just an ordinary killing weapon, is determined by whether the sword heart is properly set or not. Suk. The eyes of the old man who was wholeheartedly honing and refining the blade were the sword itself. He had poured his soul into making a sword that surpasses anything in his lifetime, and now the greatest sword was about to be born. Suk. As he was focusing on infusing the sword heart, the old man's brow furrowed, creating wrinkles. He was one who could neither hear nor see anything while concentrating. Even to the point of completely abstaining from food and drink when in a state of deep concentration. But then, Jirit. There was something that stimulated his chi sense. The energy was so powerful that it broke him out of his deep concentration even at this most crucial moment. The old man's brow furrowed even deeper. Soon the greatest sword, which had been his family's long-cherished wish, would be born from his hands. This won't do. The moment his concentration breaks, everything goes awry. He needed to pour his soul into infusing the sword heart, but if he takes his hands off here, all his efforts so far would be in vain. In a way, this might be a test. A test from heaven for the family and himself trying to surpass it. I mustn't give in. The old man tried his best to gather his thoughts. However, once his mind was disturbed, it couldn't easily return to the state of deep concentration. This was because this powerful energy wasn't just one but two. Both had surpassed the wall of walls. The old man's composure gradually cracked. What on earth was happening outside? Suk. Mok Jiangun launched his body towards Oh Woong-song, the second son of Master O of Spiritual Sword Sanctuary, who was falling towards the precipice below, and stretched out his hand while gaining speed. To minimize the consumption of true chi, he unleashed the Ritual of Binding technique of the thought-shattering 8 techniques. Ritual of Binding technique is a force that can pull anything. Swa. Thankfully, because he followed immediately after letting go, Oh Woong-song's falling body stopped midway due to the Ritual of Binding. Got it. As Mok Jiangun moved his sword finger, Puke, the precious sword plundering killing sword which had been flying with chi sword energy, stuck into the cliff wall. Standing on the blade of plundering killing sword like this, Mok Jeongeun pushed the ritual of binding even more strongly in earnest. Then Oh Woong-sung's body soared upwards in the opposite direction. It seemed he could catch Oh Woong-sung flying towards him and climb up to the cliff above the precipice. Humchit. At that moment Mok Jeongeun slightly twisted his waist and swung the precious sword Evil Commandment Sword. Hey. It was the blade user's treasured blade. Chi-controlled blade? Due to the clashing force, Mok Jeongeun's form was pushed back at an even faster speed. At this, Mok Jeongeun tried to avoid falling downwards by kicking the void and using the void step technique. Pong. However, the blade flew in quickly and he had to block it. Hey. Twak. Ok. The moment he blocked it, a scream burst out from below at the same time. Turning his gaze, he saw that Oh Woong-sung's hand had been cut off by the blade user's blade energy. The blade user's immediate goal was the sacred orb in Oh Woong-sung's hand. The corner of the blade user's mouth rose coldly as he reached for the severed wrist. To think I'd obtain a true source in a place like this. Pong. At that moment, the severed wrist of Oh Woong-sung holding the sacred orb, which was flying towards him with void object grasping, stopped in midair. The wrist that stopped midway trembled in the air. At this, the blade user looked up and glared at Mok Jeongeun. Mok Jeongeun had also used void object grasping with his other hand to prevent him from taking the wrist. You're saying you can't give it up easily, is that it? Fine. Suk. The blade user retrieved his blade that had been using Chi-controlled blade. Pong. He kicked the void with void object grasping and stuck his blade into the cliff wall of the precipice, clinging to it. Once his posture stabilized, the blade user also raised his true chi further. This unintentionally turned into a contest of true chi. Paryururu. The hand that had stopped trembling in the void was moving very slowly towards the blade user. The blade user was confident in his inner force after absorbing true sources. Aha. At this, Mok Jeongeun was about to stop using the thought-shattering 8 techniques with his right hand. Thinking about it, since the hand holding the sacred orb had been cut off, there was no reason to hold on to Oh Woong-sung to save him. As he was withdrawing the force he had been using towards Oh Woong-sung. Pong. At that moment, Oh Woong-sung's body didn't fall down but soared upwards. It's rising. Humchit. Puzzled by this sight, Mok Jeongeun and the blade user simultaneously looked up with interested eyes. This was because they felt an extraordinary energy from above. Near the top of the cliff, an old man holding a sword could be seen. Master Oh. The master has come. Wah. From the cheers coming from above, Mok Jeongeun instinctively knew that he was Master Oh Kyeonmu, the owner of Spiritual Sword Sanctuary and one of the 6 heavens. However, the face of Master Oh looking down was filled with rage that seemed about to burst. Father. Master Oh grabbed the clothes of his second son Oh Woong-sung, who was suffering while holding his cut arm, and threw him behind. Hyuk. As soon as he threw his son onto the cliff top, what Master Oh did was none other than, both guests must pay the price for disturbing my manor. Go. He created a massive sword energy nearly 3 jang long and unleashed a sword technique towards them who were clinging to the cliff wall just below, engaged in a true chi battle. Quas. At the sword technique rushing in with countless trajectories in the form of elastic sword energy, both Mok Jeongeun and the blade user stopped their true chi battle using void object grasping without hesitation. It was a sword technique unleashed with full power by Master Oh Kyeonmu, one of the 6 heavens called the pinnacle of the current martial world. This wasn't something that could be blocked while clinging to a cliff and engaged in a true chi battle. The blade user pulled out his treasured blade that he had stuck into the cliff and kicked off the cliff. He launched his body towards the incoming elastic sword energy technique, raising blade energy and unleashing a blade technique. Second technique, blade extreme form control. Likewise, Mok Jeongeun also used the elasticity of plundering killing sword's blade that he had been using as a foothold to soar upwards and unleashed the first technique of the demonic sword art. Cha-cha-chis-chak-a-king. In an instant, a battle of ultimate techniques between 3 peerless experts unfolded at the position of falling towards the precipice of the cliff. Normally, one could say that the person who secures the high ground has an advantage. But since both Mok Jeongeun and the blade user were experts who had surpassed the wall of walls, position wasn't important. The trajectories of their techniques created flashes like starlight every time they clashed. Chi-chi-cheki-chi-chin. The aftermath was so strong that the precipice cliff split, and fragments flew everywhere in chaos. The clash of techniques between these 6 heavens-level peerless experts, Paong, was evenly matched. Unable to withstand the aftermath of unleashing techniques in midair without any footing, not even on the ground, they were thrown back in opposite directions from where they had unleashed their techniques. Master O, who had unleashed his technique from above, fortunately bounced upwards and was able to land on the cliff top where people were. Master! The swordsman called out to Master O. But Master O held out his hand, gesturing them not to approach. After stopping them from coming, Master O immediately frowned. Jerk. Then black blood flowed from the corner of his mouth. He had suffered internal injuries from rashly unleashing a sword technique out of anger, trusting in the advantage of high ground, against opponents who would be difficult to determine a winner even in a one-on-one fight. Not only was he interrupted in the work of setting the final sword heart, but seeing the numerous corpses strewn across Sword Valley and his second son's severed arm, he couldn't help but vent his anger. But then, who on earth are these people? Although he took more pride as a craftsman, he was also a swordsman who stood at the pinnacle of the martial world. Even he had never heard of or seen these people before. It was just a single clash of techniques, but after colliding he realized that both of these were peerless experts who were not at all inferior to himself. Pat. Master O, who had momentarily controlled his internal injury with a breathing technique, launched his body and looked down the cliff. Due to the enormous aftermath of their clashing techniques, they must have fallen downwards. The problem was that while this would be no issue for them if it were an ordinary precipice, the valley wind must be fierce. Whether due to geographical reasons or not, a tremendous valley wind blew here. So if one falls here, it would be difficult to climb up easily even if a rope were lowered. This gets worse the further one falls down the precipice. Therefore, if they don't hurry up, they might get caught in the fierce valley wind. But then, no. Master O frowned. Instead of climbing up, they had fallen further down the precipice and were fighting while falling for some reason. Wying. The fierce valley wind blowing through the precipice. Chichicheki-chichin. Mok Jiongun and the blade user, who had fallen at an even faster speed due to the aftermath of their clashing techniques, were fiercely competing in midair, clashing sword and blade. Throughout their battle, their gazes never left a certain point. It was O Wongsong's severed hand holding the sacred orb. Chichigiching. The blade user stretched out his left hand, trying to retrieve the hand holding the sacred orb that was falling with them using void object grasping. Of course, there was no way Mok Jiongun would just let that happen. He threw the precious sword plundering killing sword that he had retrieved while falling and unleashed chi-controlled sword. Puk. The flying chi-controlled sword pierced through the wrist and skewered it like a skewer, snatching it away. Although the blade user's void object grasping was also performed with profound true chi, it couldn't match the energy carried by the chi-controlled sword. The chi-controlled sword flew off in another direction. Kyunma, you troublesome. Chong. The blade user swung his blade strongly towards Mok Jiongun. And when Mok Jiongun blocked it equally strongly, he used that force to launch his body. Of course, the direction he launched towards was the precious sword plundering killing sword that had skewered the wrist. He's quite greedy. Suk. Mok Jiongun moved his sword finger to make the precious sword plundering killing sword move in another direction. But then, Wying. Due to the intense valley wind, the sword wavered and flew off in a completely unintended direction. Think you'll lose it? Pong. The blade user changed direction likewise by kicking the air with the void step technique. Although it was difficult to maintain proper balance due to falling downwards and the severe valley wind, his form, which had gained momentum from the void step, was getting closer to the precious sword plundering killing sword. His hand was about to touch the hilt of the precious sword plundering killing sword. It was at that very moment. Humchit. The blade user hurriedly twisted his body. Twek. At that moment, a black line passed through the void, and the right forearm below the elbow, which couldn't escape the radius as he twisted his body, disappeared without a trace. The blade user, who had lost his right arm, looked at where the black line had passed with a distorted face. He saw that Mok Jiongun had even retrieved the precious sword plundering killing sword. What was that just now? For an instant he felt capacity concentrating into a single point. The power was so strong and swift that there was no room to avoid it at all. Mok Jaeongun, who had taken the blade user's right arm, smacked his lips. He had been saving the single strike of concentrated capacity for such an exquisite moment, but unfortunately he couldn't kill him. Well, I took his right arm at least. The combat power of a guy with only his left arm would inevitably decrease. At that moment, Mok Jaeongun's eyes narrowed. He saw bones slowly growing from the elbow of the disappeared right arm, with blood vessels and muscles intertwining. It was an incredible regenerative power that couldn't be described merely as fast recovery. For a disappeared part to simply regrow like that. The blade user raised the corner of his mouth at Mok Jaeongun's reaction and said in a meaningful voice, "I am a being close to immortality. Immortal." For an instant, the words spoken by the self-proclaimed prophet flashed through Mok Jaeongun's mind. Due to an immortal being, the vast organization you will create and your descendants know the entire martial world will be in danger. That person is a peerless expert pursuing the extreme of the blade, and the fact that he has appeared now means he's trying to kill you to cut off your future lineage. Could this person be the one that prophet warned about? Come to think of it, it was strange. Even though he was seeing him for the first time, he acted as if he knew him. As if he knew the future. It was at that moment. The severed wrist stuck on the precious sword, plundering killing sword. More precisely, the sacred orb that Oh Woong-sung's hand had been holding trembled strongly and emitted a dazzling light. Chapter 358. Extreme Blade 5. The sacred orb shining much brighter than before. Its light was so brilliant that it illuminated the dark precipice cliff. Is that really the true source? The blade user suddenly had doubts. Looking at the tremendous energy flowing out, he could only think it was the true source, the core of spirit beasts. However, he had never seen a true source that emitted light like this among all the ones he had seen before. As he was caught up in this doubt, Humchit, the blade user looked down the precipice. The end of the seemingly endless precipice was becoming visible. But the moment the light shone, a strange wild nature completely different from human presence was felt from below. Yet it was difficult to consider it a spirit beast. Something eerie and ominous could be felt, but a monster seemed to be some kind of evil spirit or ghost. Such natural places with little human presence and abundant natural energy were indeed good conditions for evil spirits or spirit beasts to inhabit. Seeing things bulging here and there on the ground, could they be reacting to the light? The blade user looked down, then raised his head again. That's not what's important. What he was interested in wasn't mere monsters but spirit beasts. And those were beings of high rank enough to be called the five spirits. Such low-grade monsters were outside his realm of interest. Pong. Despite the strong valley wind, the blade user kicked off the void and launched his body towards the Kyanma. He could no longer be certain whether that was the true source or not, but seeing how the Kyanma was trying not to let it be taken, it was clearly something important. But something was strange. Despite him approaching, all of the Kyanma's attention was focused on that thing. Looking at his dazed eyes, it seemed as if he had entered a state of deep concentration. A space of nothingness like a void. Mok Jaeongun looked around, unable to hide his bewilderment. When did he enter this state of deep concentration? This was clearly the world of the mind's eye. I'm sure. I was looking at the sacred orb. The strange energy emanating from the sacred orb died in bright light. Feeling a strangely familiar sensation from it, the moment he reached out to touch it, he entered this world of the mind's eye like this. What is this? As far as Mok Jaeongun knew, this was an object that gave revelations, and only the chosen ones could receive those revelations. But why did he fall into this mind's eye the moment he touched it? As he was wondering about this, come to think of it, what he was thinking about at the end wasn't about this sacred orb. Although he had touched the sacred orb, he was thinking about something else. It was the warning-like prophecy spoken by the person who called himself a prophet. I am a being close to immortality. When he heard those words from the guy, the prophet's words came to mind. Due to an immortal being, the vast organization you will create and your descendants know the entire martial world will be in danger. Is this blade user the one the prophet warned about? Just who on earth is this person? He talked as if he knew a lot about him and even knew his route from Shaolin. And the third is this place called the Holy Land of Swords, Spiritual Sword Sanctuary. It was worth the wait indeed. Although Shaolin and the Tang family were already past events, the guy spoke as if he knew in advance that he would come here. It's utterly incomprehensible. It's not even a concept of predicting future events, nor does it feel like he heard a prophecy. He speaks as if it's a past event. Who on earth is that person to speak in such a way? As questions kept piling up, at that moment the space of this world presumed to be the mind's eye began to waver, and something blurry started to appear in the surroundings. Undergrowth grew, trees covered the area, and the space of nothingness transformed into some kind of place. Then a terrible scene appeared in this created world. Numerous people had been slaughtered and turned into cold corpses, and in the center of it all, someone was leaning on a black treasure sword like a cane, holding it with difficulty. Mok Jae-un's gaze became strange as he looked at that someone. This was because, although he was seeing that person for the first time, the features of that face somewhat resembled his own. Who on earth is that? As he was wondering, someone's voice was heard. How disappointing. I had expectations since you were said to be an ancestor, but it's no comparison to him. At the familiar voice, Mok Jae-un looked in that direction. There he saw that blade user standing with a cold smile at the corner of his mouth. Judging by his treasured blade and entire outfit being stained with blood, it was clear that all this was the blade user's doing. What on earth happened here? As he was thinking this, the injured man barely stood up and opened his mouth. Cough cough. Who are you? Didn't I tell you? I am the one who will achieve the extreme through the blade. How could someone like you be in this remote area of Xinjiang? Purak. Before the man could finish speaking, the blade user's form blurred, and using a technique of shape-changing, he appeared behind the man and thrust his treasured blade into the middle of his back. Pyuke. Kiok. Why am I here, you ask? To personally annihilate you arrogant heavenly families with my own hands. Heavenly families? Sisizazu. As soon as those words ended, the surroundings shook again and everything that was visible returned to nothingness. Mok Jae-un couldn't understand what this phenomenon was. Why was he seeing such things in the world of the mind's eye? Then, the world of nothingness changed again and became some kind of place. But this place seemed somehow familiar. This is Mount Song. It was certainly Mount Song without a doubt. Having been there before, he could be sure looking at the surrounding scenery. However, it wasn't exactly the same. Rather, everything seemed more mature than when he had seen it before, but it was difficult to understand why. Then someone appeared. It was an old monk. The old monk, whose entire body was covered in wounds, looked at someone and spoke with difficulty. Amitba, patron. This humble monk has lost. Most of the old monk's wounds appeared to be from blade marks, and this too seemed familiar, so when Mok Jae-un turned his gaze to where the old monk was looking, the blade user was standing there. He had wondered, but what on earth is this? As he was puzzled, the blade user approached the old monk and spoke. As expected of the Shaolin divine monk titled one of the 5 great experts of the Central Plains. At least better than that Demon Sword Emperor I had anticipated. Demon Sword Emperor. Could it be that you are the one who appeared in Xinjiang? Sisizazu. Before the old monk could finish speaking, the surroundings wavered and became blurry again. The space that returned to nothingness was already changing into another place and showing something else. Catch him. We must kill him. Countless high-level experts could be seen, and they were chasing someone, and that someone was once again the blade user. Chwachwak. Foolish ones. The blade user leisurely swung his blade in front of these many high-level experts pursuing him, slaughtering numerous experts. The visions kept changing like this, showing the blade user's path. Those killed by the blade user were too many to count, and it was difficult to measure the end. At first, Mok Jae-un thought these were things the blade user had done, but he suddenly realized. Could it be? Are these events that will happen in the future? Come to think of it, after touching the sacred orb that reveals the future, he saw these scenes. Does this mean the sacred orb is showing him future events as a revelation? Why? He wasn't the chosen holy fire priestess. So why is it showing him such things? Could it be to let him know that this person is extremely dangerous? Is it giving a revelation to stop him for that reason? If I kill this person, will all the things I've just seen not happen? He wasn't some kind of hero. Nevertheless, showing this to him, is it because his future generations will suffer as that so-called prophet said? Will I have descendants? Mok Jae-un had only thought about revenge, so he had never considered children or descendants. The only reality he saw was stained with blood. It's truly incomprehensible. descendants. He still wasn't sure if these scenes being shown were really revelations or future events. Is there really no one else who can do anything about the blade user except himself? Is that why a mere object is urging him to kill this being? It was at that very moment. Boom. Once again the surroundings wavered and changed into some place. This looked like a battlefield. Countless high-level experts from various sects were divided into two factions, engaged in a life-and-death struggle. Is this also an event that will happen in the distant future? Will I see the blade user's slaughter again? As he was wondering, this time he saw unexpected scenes. It was not the blade user but several high-level experts using the same martial arts as the blade user, slaughtering numerous people. They seemed inferior compared to the blade user, but these were also considerable experts. Seeing this, Mok Jae-young clicked his tongue. Will there be so many high-level experts reaching this level in the distant future? It looks dangerous. Whether these were descendants raised by the blade user or his subordinates he wasn't sure, but if such people were to overflow, it certainly seemed like the martial world would become chaotic. Whatever it showed, it seemed the sacred orb was trying to make him aware in some way that the blade user was dangerous. It was just as he was thinking this. Gugu. At that moment the surroundings stirred, and the gazes of the martial artists on the battlefield, whether allies or enemies, were seen turning towards someone. It was in the middle of the battlefield in mid-air. Someone wearing a black dragon robe could be seen floating in the air. Could it be the highest realm of lightness technique called Transcending Void Path? Who is that? Due to the viewing angle, only the side profile was barely visible, but it was a handsome man with an extremely pale white face and long flowing hair. It's hard to see clearly, but this person also gives a strangely familiar feeling. Then, Durururu. A strong vibration arose from the ground. Then weapons that had lost their owners and become corpses began to float into the air. Dung dung dung. The sight of numerous weapons adorning the top of the castle was truly spectacular. The eyes of the martial artists watching this from the ground were filled with astonishment. It wasn't just them who couldn't help but be amazed. Mok Jae-young too couldn't help but be amazed at the monstrous, incredible inner force of the man lifting so many weapons with void object grasping. No chi-controlled sword. In terms of inner force alone, it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say he had reached the realm of the best in the world, no, the realm of gods. But then an even more astonishing thing happened. Boom. Just chi-controlled sword technique alone would be amazing, but when numerous swords and blades raised blue strong energy, it felt like stars twinkling in broad daylight were embroidering the sky. While everyone was speechless with their mouths open seeing this, the being showing this incredible sight opened his mouth and said something. Along with this, Mok Jae-young's eyes and the corners of his mouth twitched, filled with ecstasy at the incredible sight unfolding before his eyes. As he was unable to take his eyes off that scene. Mortal. At Chang Ryong's piercing cry ringing in his ears, the world of the mind's eye disappeared in an instant, and Mok Jae-young was able to return to reality. Returning to reality, Mok Jae-young saw the blade user unleashing a blade technique towards him. It was an incredible ultimate technique tracing numerous trajectories. Quack 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 quack. Because it was so close, Mok Jae-young had no time to avoid and unleashed the third technique of the demon sword art. Cha-cha-cha-cha-cha-chang. Between the precipice where valley winds raged, the sword techniques and blade techniques of the two clashed fiercely. Twack twack. Although they were mere scratches, his arm and thigh were cut simultaneously as the guy pushed forward, disregarding the sword techniques aiming for his vital points. Unlike before, the blade user's blade techniques had become extremely fierce. Could it be? Mok Jae-young's eyes narrowed. Normally, one wouldn't want to miss a single move as each was so strong it could be fatal. But whether overconfident in his own regenerative ability or not, he pushed forward too recklessly. The outcome of our battle is already decided, you whose life would be in danger from a single blade cut, Kyeonma. The blade user, certain of victory, unleashed his blade techniques even more recklessly. As he was trying to decide the match before reaching the ground of the precipice at that very moment, a thunderous sound burst out from the end of the precipice. Quack 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 quang. At the thunderous sound, both people simultaneously stopped their contest and created distance while looking down. What on earth is that? A bizarre sight met their eyes. It was because huge, elongated things that looked like earthworms in form had broken through the bottom of the precipice and sprung out. Chapter 359, Sacred Orb, 1. Bizarre monsters breaking through the bottom of the precipice. They had a form reminiscent of earthworms, but what was different was that on the part that seemed to be the head, there were dozens of black eyes along with countless sharp teeth that were difficult to count from the outside to the inside of a round mouth. Kwang. Quaquaquaquang. Although described as earthworm-like in form, their thickness was much thicker than a human's torso, and their length appeared to be at least 6 to 8 jang. Moreover, these monsters that suddenly sprang out were not single entities. There seemed to be dozens of them. What on earth are those? As Mok Jiangun frowned, Chong Ryong's voice rang in his ears. They're Earth Mole Dragons. Earth Mole Dragons? Earth Mole Dragon is another name for earthworms. Because he dealt with medicinal ingredients, his grandfather also called earthworms Earth Mole Dragons. Of course, that wasn't the important thing right now. They don't seem to have strong spiritual power. Even so, they're probably at the level of monstrous beasts. Although most evil spirits and monsters are like that, I've heard Earth Mole Dragons extremely dislike light and only live deep underground. A precipice this deep seems like a perfect place where light doesn't enter well. That's true. But the reason those things are rampaging like that is probably because of that, right? What do you mean? At her words, Mok Jiangun looked at the sacred orb. He could understand why Chong Ryong had such a reaction. He saw that cracks were forming in the brightly shining sacred orb. Cracks. Come to think of it, the light of the sacred orb had weakened considerably. That's why the cracked parts were clearly visible, but... He wondered why it had cracked, but he understood the reason. There were very small blade marks on the sacred orb. He had tried his best to keep the blade aura from touching the sacred orb while fighting with the blade user, but it seems some of that sharp energy had touched it after all. Mok Jiangun looked at the sacred orb as if troubled. If the sacred orb breaks and shatters, it would mean their efforts in coming here were in vain. For now. Kwawaya. It was at that moment. The Earth Mole Dragons that had broken through the ground and were thrashing about soared upwards with monstrous cries. About a dozen stretched up simultaneously, and what they were aiming for was none other than me. 2 or 3 of the Earth Mole Dragons stretched towards the blade user, but most of these numerous creatures were stretching towards Mok Jiangun. Judging by their roaring with monstrous cries, they seemed enraged. Wasn't disliking supposed to mean avoiding? They really hated light. No, it was at the level of extreme hatred. Perhaps because of this, they all aimed at him as if desperate to quickly eliminate the light of the sacred orb. Boom. At this, Mok Jiangun raised his demonic energy and unleashed black sword energy. Unlike in the past, now these evil spirits and monsters at the level of monstrous beasts were not something he couldn't handle no matter how many there were. After raising sword energy like this, he aimed his sword at the stretching Earth Mole Dragons, pulling it back. It was at that moment. Weruruk. Along with a heat so intense it felt scorching, a huge flame blazed up. Puzzled by this, he looked in that direction and saw that the blade user's entire body was covered in a blazing huge flame. His body is enveloped in flames? What kind of sorcery is this? As he was wondering about this, the blade user shouted as if for Mok Jiangun to hear. Watch closely, Kionma. This is my true power. With that shout, the blade user unleashed an ultimate technique made of flames towards the Earth Mole Dragons rushing towards him. 4th technique, Blade Extreme Wave Force, Fire. Weruruk. Quaquaquaquaquaquasha. Blade energy imbued with flames crashed down on the Earth Mole Dragons like a huge tidal wave. For the Earth Mole Dragons, flames were truly their antithesis. As the flaming blade energy mercilessly cut through the bodies of the Earth Mole Dragons, they screamed bizarre cries as they burned in the fire energy. Kukakakakakakas. The momentum of the blade technique imbued with fire energy was so strong that the Earth Mole Dragons were helplessly overwhelmed. But then a coincidental event occurred. Kuyo-yo. Quaquaquaquas. The many Earth Mole Dragons that had been rushing towards Mok Jiangun because of the sacred orb's light all suddenly changed direction towards the blade user. Not only that, but even the Earth Mole Dragons that had still been on the ground also soared upwards. No. This wasn't intentional. However, coincidentally, the blazing flames emitted an even stronger light than the sacred orb, and this was enough to stimulate the Earth Mole Dragons. He could easily handle 2 or 3, but when this many Earth Mole Dragons entangled and surged like a wave, even the blade user would have trouble dealing with all of them. Papapapapak. Oh no. Individually, they weren't evil spirits and monsters that were difficult to handle. But not only were there many of them, their pushing force and momentum as they entangled and surged was tremendous. As a result, the blade user who had been wielding flaming blade energy was unable to withstand their surging momentum and ended up being swept away by the group of earth mole dragons. Mok Jaeongun, who was hanging by sticking his sword into the wall, smiled slightly as he watched this scene. If he hadn't raised fire energy saying he would use his full power, this wouldn't have happened. Should one say he's unlucky? It was truly a case of self-entrapment. Mok Jaeongun looked down. He could see the ground at the end of the precipice. Thinking he couldn't keep hanging on the cliff wall forever, Mok Jaeongun decided he should go down, so he pulled out his sword and launched his body downwards. As it was only about 20 zhang, he slowly descended while controlling air resistance with true qi, and landed on the ground. After coming down to the ground like this, the ground wriggled and the few remaining earth mole dragons revealed themselves. Most of the individuals had rushed to the blade user, and the few remaining ones seemed to be young earth mole dragons that hadn't fully grown yet. At this, Mok Jaeongun was about to raise strong energy to deal with them, but quiet. Even if they were not fully grown earth mole dragons, they were still much larger and longer than humans, so they were equally threatening. The earth mole dragons rushed towards Mok Jaeongun with monstrous cries. But the earth mole dragons approaching nearby suddenly started trembling. Mok Jaeongun's eyes glinted with interest as he was gauging the distance. Why are they suddenly acting like this? As he was wondering, the earth mole dragons suddenly lowered their bodies and began to retreat, crawling on the ground. What's going on? They're afraid. You say they're afraid? Don't you know why? At Chong Ryong's words, Mok Jaeongun suddenly pulled out an accessory he was wearing at his waist. As he pulled this out, the earth mole dragons that had been flinching and retreating gave up even being wary and completely turned their bodies, digging into the ground. Querururu. Seeing their behavior, Mok Jaeongun looked at the accessory. This was an accessory that the white-faced king, the golden-furred nine-tailed fox, had made for him using the fur from its cut tail. She had said that with this he wouldn't have to deal with most evil spirits and monsters, and it seems that wasn't just empty talk. Ao Yu, the demonic beast trapped in Shaolin's demon-subduing cave, perhaps because it was of high rank and possessed intelligence, tried to use the golden-furred nine-tailed fox's spiritual power while fearing it. But the earth mole dragons, perhaps because they were low-ranking monstrous beasts, seemed rather true to their instincts. It's quite useful. Well, I suppose so. Watching them escape into the ground, Mok Jaeongun put his precious sword, Evil Commandment sword, back into its scabbard. Chuk. Chong Ryong then said to him. But how did you enter that state of deep concentration earlier? Could it be because of that sacred orb? At her question, Mok Jaeongun pulled out Oh Woonsong's severed hand that was stuck on Plundering Killing sword. The sacred orb that the severed hand was grasping had cracks in it. It seemed like it might break at any moment if handled carelessly. I'm not sure. I suddenly entered the mind's eye state. Suddenly, you say? Yes. That's strange. I don't understand how you entered that state of deep concentration when you're not the chosen one that old woman or that girl mortal talked about. So what did you see? Yes. What did you see? A possible distant future. A possible distant future? Then you say you saw revelations, no future events? I don't know. Since it's a future that might happen. If it's the future, what happened? She asked out of curiosity. At this, Mok Jaeongun shrugged and answered. I'm not sure. It doesn't seem like I saw what I really wanted to see, and it seems to have shown too distant a future, so it seems useless. You say it seems useless? Yes. Well, not all of it. Mok Jaeongun couldn't forget that scene he saw at the end. It brought a shock close to ecstasy. Seeing that one thing alone was enough. Then Chong Ryong said, I don't know how you came to see such things, but it seems you need that girl mortal's power to see what you really want. That's true, but the state of the sacred orb wasn't very good. It had cracks and seemed like it might break if handled even slightly wrong. Moreover, the energy flowing out of the sacred orb along with the bright light was gradually weakening. Looking at its state, it seemed like it would soon lose its power as an object. For now, mortal, hide that. No, I'll manifest and take that up the cliff. You Chong Ryong? Yes. Look at where the earth mole dragons are. How long do you think they can hold out? Kugagugagu. Red fire energy was flowing out from between the entangled monstrous earth mole dragons. Although he was swept away because there were so many, the blade user would soon break out of there. I don't know what that monster-like mortal's identity is, but it seems he has consumed the true sources of beings called spirit beasts. Spirit beasts. Suddenly, Mok Jung-un recalled what Dam Baekwa, the blood saint of the Nine Blood sect, had said and what he had seen in the Book of Mountains and Seas Strange Beasts. Unlike evil spirits and monsters born from the gathering of Yin energy, spirit beasts were beings formed by the gathering of natural energy and pure spiritual power. A typical example is the dragon, which has been called the most sacred being since ancient times. Ah. Why do you say that? It seems to be that person. That person, the peerless expert who appeared on that day of great calamity and used strange blade techniques. Dam Baekwa, the blood saint of the Nine Blood sect, had faced the rampaging spirit beast dragon turtle, and in the process, a blade expert of unknown identity appeared and finished off the weakened dragon turtle, taking its true source. Dam Baekwa, who had consumed just a little of the spirit beast's blood, didn't age and gained lightning energy. I see. That guy could indeed be the one that woman from the Nine Blood sect mentioned. From lightning energy to incredible regenerative power. These weren't abilities that an ordinary human could possess. Surely that person must have absorbed the dragon turtle's true source. Though it might not be just one. Seeing that he handles fire energy in addition to lightning energy, he must have obtained the true source of another spirit beast as well. Probably the Fire Qilin. Fire Qilin. That too is a legendary spirit beast. This being, said to have been born in hot lava, is also called the incarnation of flames. Come to think of it, 10,000 men commander So Yiren said that on the day of great calamity, a fire Qilin appeared in the imperial capital of Kaifeng and turned the place into a wasteland. Just how many true sources has he eaten? Although he had seen the years he had lived and possible future events through the sacred orb, he was still a being full of questions. Quajik. At that moment, someone sprang up as flames soared from among the earth mole dragons. It was the blade user. He thought he wouldn't last long, but he had managed to break out from there. Quaduk. At that moment, Chong Ryong broke the wooden puppet and manifested. She, who had come out after a long time, reached out her hand to Mok Jung-un. It's about time. If you fight with that, it will surely break. Hand it over to me. I suppose we should. Thinking her words were right, Mok Jung-un then carefully tried to open the fingers of the severed wrist stuck on the precious sword, plundering killing sword, to take out the sacred orb. It was the moment his hand touched the cracked sacred orb like this. Mok Jung-un frowned. The world changed to a state of nothingness again. In an instant he had fallen into deep concentration again and entered the world of the mind's eye. There's no time for this. Mok Jung-un focused his mind and tried to escape from the state of deep concentration. But at that moment a strange thing happened before his eyes. Huerururiak. Black flames began to blaze in the space where there had been nothing. Why is this phenomenon of flames burning black, not reddish or scarlet? As he was wondering about this strangeness, the black flames suddenly began to swirl. Wee! As it swirled like this, the flames gradually gathered in one place. Then eventually the gathered black flames began to take on a form, and it took on a human shape. Mok Jung-un's eyes glinted with interest as he watched this. This was because the appearance of the being that had taken on a human form was none other than himself. What is this now? Why is his own appearance suddenly visible? As he was wondering, the being created from the gathered black flames that had taken on his appearance suddenly approached. What's going on? Is this just a simple illusion? Unlike when he entered the mind's eye earlier, this being born from black flames and having the same appearance as himself seemed to be aware of him. Then this being opened its mouth. So that appearance is the result of your choice. Are you talking to me? Yes. Who else do you think I'm talking to? At these words from the being, Mok Jung-un's eyes were instantly filled with wariness. He had thought it was different from a simple illusion, and it really was recognizing him and speaking. At this reaction from Mok Jung-un, the being with the same appearance as him smiled slightly and said, "Interesting. Although the result can't be helped for something you desired so much, it's quite an imperfect appearance. Or is it because you've become an imperfect being? What on earth are you talking about?" "I'm talking about your choice, no our choice." Our. Mok Jung-un's mind became confused by this being's words. He couldn't understand at all what it was saying. What do you mean by our? To that question the being approached and said, "Well, isn't that a question you should ask your closed self?" My closed self. Yes. The fact that you closed yourself is ultimately your own choice. It doesn't seem to be an area I should interfere with. You've been talking about choice this and that, but what on earth are you saying? If you know something, can't you explain it properly? Even if you closed yourself, you are also me. Of course, I could answer your questions, but there's no time for that. What do you mean by that? The cracks are spreading rapidly. The fragment will soon disappear. By fragment, does it mean the sacred orb? Then the being walked right up to him and said, "Hurry. Already nearly half the energy has been lost due to the cracks. What on earth?" At that moment, the being reached out its hand towards Mok Jaeongun. At this, Mok Jaeongun tried to move his body to avoid it, but he couldn't move, as if something was restraining him. In the meantime, the being placed its palm in the center of Mok Jaeongun's chest. Weruruk. At that moment, the being resembling himself was enveloped in black flames. What on earth is it trying to do? As he was wondering, the being smiled and said in a meaningful voice, "I am a fragment of the core. Just a piece of you." Chapter 360, Sacred Orb 2. Well, don't tell me it's you again? Chong Ryong, who had been reaching out her hand asking for the cracked sacred orb, clicked her tongue in disbelief. The moment he touched the sacred orb, his eyes glazed over. He had clearly fallen into the mind's eye state. She couldn't understand what mysterious power the sacred orb possessed for someone with not weak willpower to keep falling into a state of deep concentration like this. Normally it wouldn't matter, but there was no time for this now. Chong Ryong, having manifested to wake Mok Jaeongun, was about to reach out her hand. This expression is new again. It was a face rarely seen on him. Chong Ryong, who had been staring at the dazed-eyed Mok Jaeongun, shook her head and hurriedly tried to wake him. But at that very moment, Weruk. Suddenly, flames flickered and blazed from Mok Jaeongun's hand holding the sacred orb. Seeing this, Chong Ryong's eyes widened. It wasn't ordinary flames. The flames were so black as to be reminiscent of an abyss. Seeing this, her face was filled with shock. Black fire? This? What on earth? Weruk. At that moment, the black flames that had blazed up from the hand holding the sacred orb tried to spread over his entire body. But then the black flames that were about to spread suddenly subsided. Then they disappeared as if they had never been there. The flames had only appeared for a very brief moment. What? What on earth was this just now? I am a fragment of the core. Just a piece of you. A fragment of the core? What does this mean? As he was wondering, the flames enveloping the being resembling himself began to transfer to his body through its two hands. At this incredibly strange phenomenon, Mok Jaeongun tried to move his body but couldn't budge at all. Rather, the moment the black flames touched him, he was caught in a strange sensation. It felt like an endless abyss in darkness, and despite being flames, it wasn't hot but terribly cold. But what was even stranger was that this sensation didn't feel like it was the first time. The moment the flames spread over his body, he felt something vaguely familiar yet nostalgic. Weruk. As the black flames spread over his entire body like that, something welled up inside along with a sense of elation. Just as he was about to fully savor these black flames, someone placed a hand on his shoulder. "I'll hold on to this for now." Weruk. Then the black flames that had been spreading over his entire body began to gather towards his shoulder. Then the black flames disappeared as if completely burned away. Wondering what on earth had happened, the being with the same appearance that had placed its hand on Mok Jaeongun's shoulder furrowed its brow and spoke. Did you exist?" "I did." A familiar voice. No, rather than familiar, it was the same voice. Mok Jaeongun tried to somehow turn his head at the voice that was no different from the being resembling himself. But he couldn't move, as if his body was restrained. Then, "I'm sorry, but it's not time yet." "What?" "No. Even without this, your potential surpasses mine." "What are you saying?" "Everything depends on how you think about it. In the end, it's up to your will to do it." "Who on earth are you?" "Well, you'll know everything soon enough." With those words, the being with the voice removed its hand from Mok Jaeongun's shoulder. Then Mok Jaeongun lost consciousness. Sir. The unconscious Mok Jaeongun's form disappeared as if scattering. As Mok Jaeongun disappeared like that, the one beside him stepped forward, and its appearance was no different from Mok Jaeongun. It was him itself. Watching this, the being that had called itself a fragment of the core spoke. "An incomprehensible choice. Did you even separate your personality? Let's say that's the case. Isn't it an unnecessary choice? It was a necessary choice. Was it a choice made because you couldn't bear it? I see. But why did you stop him from taking the energy remaining in the fragment? Wasn't this a contingency plan for that very purpose? To the being's question, the one with Mok Jaeongun's appearance shook its head. The time hasn't come yet. It's too early to handle this yet. To say it's too early, he's become incredibly strong despite being an incomplete being. It's not enough. If he takes the fragment's energy and reveals that in an unprepared state, even those beyond will notice. At those words, the eyes of the being calling itself a fragment of the core glinted with interest. Then, as if finally understanding, it spoke. I see. So that's why you stopped it. Yes. But now I understand. What do you mean? I wondered why you were doing such unnecessary things, but it wasn't just a choice made because you couldn't bear it. It was all out of necessity. As soon as those words ended, the body of the being calling itself a fragment of the core began to scatter. To it, the one who was Mok Jaeongun himself put his hands together and made a respectful fist palm salute. What's that? This is how one shows respect here. Respect. That's a good word. I feel light now that I've finished my task and even my mood has improved. Is this what they call the meaning of existence? With those words, the scattering being smiled. And that smile disappeared into the scattering. Pasasususu. At that moment, the cracked sacred orb shattered and crumbled like sand. Mok Jaeongun, coming to his senses, frowned at this sight. He hadn't expected the sacred orb to completely crumble. Mok Jaeongun's mind became complicated as he watched this. The events experienced in the mind's eye were even harder to define than what he had seen before. What on earth was the fragment of the core, and who was that being that suddenly appeared? Who on earth are you? Well, you'll know everything soon enough. That tone. Although it didn't show its face, he remembered. It was certainly that being that had occupied his body. He could be sure because he remembered exactly that sensation from then and that tone of speech. Just what is that being inside me? It certainly existed, but after briefly meeting it in the mind's eye, his mind became even more complicated. Then, mortal you. What was that just now? Chong Ryong suddenly thrust her face close and asked. At this, Mok Jaeongun asked back, puzzled. What do you mean, what was that? The black fire. Black fire. Yes. That was certainly that. That's definitely not it. What on earth are you? Mortal. If you ask like that, I don't know how to answer you. Just now your body was covered in black flames. Of course they went out instantly as soon as they appeared, but... You say they went out instantly? Yes. What on earth happened? If you're asking about something because of black flames, I don't know either. The things that happened in the mind's eye have become even harder to explain than before. At these words from Mok Jaeongun, Chong Ryong bit her lip hard. Then she let out a long sigh. To her, Mok Jaeongun spoke with sharpened eyes. For now, it seems better to talk about the black flames later. At these words, Chong Ryong looked where Mok Jaeongun was looking. There she saw the blade user, his entire body covered in the green blood of the earth mole dragons, approaching with a terrifying momentum. Mok Jaeongun handed her the powder of the shattered sacred orb. Although it had lost its form, it seemed they should still keep it for now. Can you handle him alone? I'll have to try. From the point of consuming more than 2 true sources, that guy can hardly be considered human anymore. Yes. He's literally a being close to immortality. See. Let's test it. Test? How to kill him, that is. Pat. As soon as those words ended, Mok Jaeongun also launched his body towards the blade user approaching him. The morale and fighting spirit of the blade user who had massacred the monstrous earth mole dragons had reached its peak. That momentum had greatly increased and... Weruk. His treasured blade rippled with flames, looking as if it would spew them out at any moment. Let's end this here. Kyeonma. Chwa 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 chwa. Third technique, Blade Extreme Net Purity. The blade user's treasured blade, covered in flames, rushed towards Mok Jaeongun, tracing strange trajectories that could never come from ordinary blade techniques. Mok Jaeongun calmly observed this and... Chwa 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 chwa. The blade technique then spread out, growing like a large net and densely filling the surroundings. Its range was incredibly vast, reaching up to 8 zhang. It was literally a net of flaming blades, leaving no place to escape. Prung. Although he might have been slightly overwhelmed by the tremendous momentum of the blade technique, Mok Jung'un drew his precious sword Evil Commandment sword without the slightest change in expression. After drawing his sword like that, Mok Jung'un immediately traced the blade from bottom to top with his left sword finger. Then, Swaryawa. At that moment the sword began to emit an extreme cold energy. The cold energy that flowed out like that merged with demonic energy and turned into a black cold wave. He handles cold energy? The blade user inwardly clicked his tongue at this sight. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that the fire energy obtained from consuming the fire Qilin's true source possessed the greatest destructive power among spirit beasts. He had intended to gain the upper hand in one breath by imbuing this fire energy, but he hadn't expected that guy who hadn't even consumed a true source to be able to handle cold energy, which could be called its antithesis. But that energy isn't obtained from a true source, so it must be just a temporary power. Weruruk. In the end, when they clashed, it would be advantageous for him. Like that, the flaming blade technique and the sword technique imbued with cold energy were about to clash. Cha-cha-cha-cha-cha-chang. The sword technique Mok Jung'un unleashed was the first technique of the demonic sword art. There was no need to block over a wide range. Since the entire net made of blades wasn't attacking him anyway, it was enough to just protect himself. Chi-chi-cheki-chi-chin. The fiercely clashing fire energy and cold energy soon created misty steam, as befitting energies of opposing natures. As steam rose, the surrounding visibility was suddenly obscured. The expression of the blade user clashing techniques became strange. What's going on? He was clearly pushing with an overwhelming offensive by drawing up even the power of the true source, but the other wasn't being pushed back at all. Rather, the energy seemed to have become stronger than before. What on earth is this? Has his inner force increased? No. That couldn't be. How could inner force increase this much in such a short time? This was impossible. Chi-chi-cheki-chin. The blade user's eyes narrowed as he clashed blades. He wondered if he was mistaken because of the steam, but something like steam was also rising from Mok Jung'un's entire body. Moreover, his face was flushed red. Sure. Could it be that his techniques have gained more momentum because of this? Whatever technique this was, temporarily raising energy like this would become disadvantageous as time passed. And, chi-chi-chi-ching. The blade user who had been unleashing blade techniques suddenly initiated a change in technique, twisting his waist and rotating his blade. At that moment, a whirlwind of flames arose centered on him. Sixth technique, Revolving Dragon Ascending to Heaven. It was an ultimate technique that created a whirlwind with blade energy to narrow in and pressure the opponent. But at that instant, Tatak. Mok Jung'un's form split into two. He had divided his form using the wind god's step. Then one of the divided forms of Mok Jung'un, Kung, stepped firmly and pulled his sword towards the whirlwind of flames created by the blade user, then thrust it forward. Then, qua. From the tip of the sword, a cold black whirlwind arose and surged towards the whirlwind created by the blade user. This was none other than the pursuing swirling sword. Chi-chi-cheki-chi-chin. The whirlwinds of flames and cold black energy created by the two peerless experts clashed fiercely. Their power was indeed evenly matched. But there was one human figure flying into the center of those whirlwinds. It was the doppelganger of Mok Jung'un, divided using the wind shadow two forms technique of the wind god step. Humchit. The blade user instinctively realized what Mok Jung'un was trying to do. It was certainly that single sword strike that concentrated all power into one point. At this, the blade user's gaze sharpened. That must be your ultimate strike. But even that sword isn't without weakness. When all power is concentrated into one point, the force becomes so strong that it cannot be stopped midway. Anyone who has experienced or suffered from this even once would find this single weakness. If one could change direction midway with this technique, that weakness could be compensated for, but no matter how you look at it, this is a strike that surpasses limits. It's not something that can possibly be stopped. If that's the case, quack. The blade user gripped his blade handle tightly while unleashing Revolving Dragon Ascending to Heaven. Twack. At that moment, a black line appeared in the center of the whirlwind. It was at that very instant. Thanks to the whirlwind, the target was gathered into just one point, So the blade user was certain that this concentration of power would aim for only one spot and moved exactly half a step. And in that state of moving half a step to the side, twack, he unleashed the fifth technique, Extreme Swift Killing Blade. There's absolutely no way to avoid it. You'll have to take the full brunt of that power concentrated into one point along with my blade strike. Pagagagakak. At that moment the blade user's eyes shook. That was because he stopped. Mok Jiangun had stopped midway through unleashing his single strike with concentrated power. Because of this, the ground split and fragments soared upwards. But this wasn't the end. When concentrating power like this, the force becomes so strong that only thrusting is possible, so if this single strike is forcibly stopped like this, woodak, the only thing that had to withstand that aftermath was his own body.